This is the Global News Podcast from the BBC World Service. Hello, I'm Emilio Sampedro, and in the early hours of Tuesday, the 30th of April, these are our main stories. The Islamic State group has released a video purporting to show its leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, for the first time in 5 years. Boeing CEO Dennis Muilenburg has apologized for the company's role in 2 deadly plane crashes at a shareholders' meeting. The U.S. has issued fresh warnings about the risk posed by the Chinese telecoms firm Huawei if it's granted access to 5G networks. Also in this podcast, aid agencies say they're still struggling to reach the worst affected areas in Mozambique after the country was hit by a second devastating cyclone just 6 weeks after the first one. And
they do so much good for the country. You see them in the news doing this and that for the good of the people. And it really takes you here.
People in Japan have been giving Emperor Akihito a warm send-off before he abdicates today. The Islamic State group has posted a propaganda video which appears to show its elusive leader vowing to seek revenge for the group's loss of territory.
وأن معركة الباغوز انتهت وقد تجلت فيها.
The video is dated April, and if verified, it would be the first sighting of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi since 2014, when he proclaimed from Mosul the creation of a caliphate across parts of Syria and Iraq. In this new footage, he acknowledges defeat at Baghouz, the group's last stronghold in the region. I asked our security correspondent Frank Gardner how sure we could be that the video really did show the IS leader.
I would be amazed if this wasn't him. If it is a fake, then it's an incredibly good one. It certainly appears to be him, and it sounds like him. This is a man with a $25 million bounty on his head, and he's managed to stay at large and has survived all the airstrikes that, according to the Russians and the Iraqis, had probably killed him. The Americans thought he was so badly wounded in 2017 that he was taken out of the battle for months, and yet there he is in apparent good health, referring to very recent events. So for IS's supporters around the world and in the Middle East, this, I'm afraid, will be a big encouragement. Now, rather like a CEO who's got to address a corporate disaster, he had to address the fact that they have lost the caliphate, that in Baghouz, that was the battle where they saw the end of their caliphate. The dream is over. So he needed to kind of rally the troops, as it were, and tell them it's not over. In his speech, he talks about 92 operations in goodness knows how many countries around the world, pledges of allegiance from countries like Burkina Faso. But the fact is that he is somebody who the last time he appeared in Vision was running a quasi-country that in the end ruled nearly 10 million people, had oil fields, farms, an income, even its own currency. They've got none of that now. They're just back to being an underground terrorist organization.
But are they feeling more emboldened because of what happened in Sri Lanka, despite the fact that they were defeated in Syria and Iraq? Is this a way for IS to send a message, sort of to say, we're still here?
The Sri Lanka attacks are exactly what every expert who understands Al-Qaeda and Islamic State has warned, that they will retaliate in the only way they know how. They don't have any power anymore, so they can they will want to inflict damage. And unfortunately, if you look at, say, Syria and Iraq, where IS has been running a caliphate, the factors that propelled them to success, military success in the first place, in many cases are still there. But ISIS and Al-Qaeda simply don't carry the majority of Muslim population with them. They are a fringe organization that will always appeal to violent individuals, often with twisted psychopathic personalities.
And no doubt the intelligence services in Washington, here in London, and elsewhere will be poring over this video, trying to glean whatever they can from it.
They will, and he has taken a certain security risk in releasing this, because now the world knows what he looked like, at least at the beginning of April, when this was probably recorded. But, of course, there are very few clues in the background behind him. It's just a white background. There are 3 figures who appear in it with blurred faces. If you remember how they eventually got Osama bin Laden in May 2011, it wasn't from the details that were in the video. It was by following the courier who actually got the video from his safe house in Pakistan to the internet where it was uploaded. So probably they'll be trying to do the same thing. And I'm quite certain that IS will be wise to that. They will have recorded this and then moved him. And there will be a very small group of people around him, a hardcore of absolutely trusted bodyguards, a kind of Praetorian guard, who will go to their deaths to protect him, who will be moving him around the country from one safe house to another.
Our security correspondent, Frank Gardner. We're now going to Chicago.
We at Boeing are sorry for the loss of life in these tragedies, and they continue to weigh heavily on us.
The Boeing CEO, Dennis Muilenburg, apologizing for the airline manufacturer's role in 2 deadly plane crashes involving its now grounded Boeing 737 MAX aircraft. He was speaking in Chicago at the start of a shareholders meeting where the issues of the faulty safety features on the 737 MAX and the company's handling of the crisis were at the top of the agenda. He also faced tough questions from the news media, who were getting their first opportunity to ask him questions since the crashes.
There are a lot of passengers who are afraid of the MAX. Why should they trust Boeing that it will be safe with this upgrade?
First of all, again, our commitment to safety is unwavering, and we do regret the impact that this has had to passengers. We know we do have work to do to earn and re-earn that trust, and we will. We're going to be working very closely with our airline customers and with the FAA and with regulatory authorities around the world as we finish up the certification process on the software update and have safe re-entry into service. We're going to be diligently doing that airplane by airplane with our customers. I think getting it back up and flying is obviously a key step in rebuilding confidence.
So did Dennis Muilenburg's apology and assurances that the safety issues were resolved satisfy Boeing shareholders? I put that to Michelle Fleury, our North America business correspondent in New York.
Shareholders have seen the company's share price fall roughly 10% since the Ethiopian Airlines accident back in March. So they had some tough questions, chief amongst them. When is this plane going to get back in the air? Because, of course, the 737 MAX jets have been grounded worldwide since these 2 fatal crashes. Dennis Muilenburg confirmed that this is sort of priority number 1 for the company, and that to get to that point, they need to issue a software fix for their flight system, or MCAS system, which has been implicated in the 2 crashes. Now, he stopped short of sort of accepting that there was a flaw in the design, but did say that they were working on some kind of software fix, and that's something that shareholders have been wanting to hear more about.
And there's been pressure as well from whistleblowers who are claiming they had informed the Federal Aviation Authority, or FAA, of problems with the 737 MAX after the Lion Air crash, but that nothing had been done. So I guess the question is, does the fault lie with the FAA or with Boeing?
That's the question that everyone's looking for answers to. There is definitely renewed scrutiny on Boeing. There are these questions now being raised. Talk of whistleblowers calling to a hotline set up by regulators after the crash. I think one thing we can take away from all of this is this idea that Boeing had been able to do a lot of the certification. Under Donald Trump, we've seen this idea that regulations could be rolled back, that you would need fewer of them. But in the case of a crash like this, it raises concerns about safety. And I think we're going to see a lot more pressure both on the regulator and the plane maker going forward. The FAA, in fact, even as Boeing was holding a shareholders meeting, was actually at a gathering with several other regulators from around the world to look at the implications of this crash and to try and get to the bottom of it. But for Boeing, the question is, can it restore trust? It's not just about getting these planes back in the air.
Michelle Fleury. The United States has delivered a fresh warning about what it believes is the unacceptable risk to security if the Chinese technology firm Huawei is involved in building a new 5G data network. A senior U.S. State Department official, Robert Strayer, said it would have to reevaluate its intelligence sharing with Western allies if they gave the company a role in the high-speed networks. Last week, the U.S. expressed serious concerns after it was reported that Britain had agreed Huawei could work on non-core elements of its 5G network here in the UK. Our security correspondent, Gordon Carrera, has been speaking to Mr. Strayer.
The stakes could not be higher, Robert Strayer said, describing who should build new 5G networks as a monumental decision. Allowing Chinese companies to play a role, he said, was like giving Beijing a loaded gun. Last week, a leak from the UK's National Security Council suggested the government would allow Huawei to have a role. Today, Mr. Strayer made clear such a decision would have consequences.
If countries put unsecured, untrusted vendors into their 5G networks in any place, we're letting countries know that we're going to have to consider the risk that that produces to our information sharing arrangements with them. We'll evaluate that risk. At this point, though, we can't make any firm commitments about how that's going to affect our information sharing relationship in the future.
Huawei has consistently denied the accusations that it might work on behalf of the Chinese state. UK intelligence officials have argued that they can manage any risk from the company by excluding it from carrying the most sensitive information and from the so-called core of the new network. Indications from last week's reports, the subject of a leak inquiry, were that this would be the UK's position. But that distinction between sensitive and non-sensitive parts of the network was one that Mr. Strayer rejected.
We don't believe that any part of a 5G network should have untrustworthy vendors. What people refer to as the non-core or the edge, over time will be the critical part of the network.
He would not directly comment on the UK's reported decision, but did say Washington was having a frank and ongoing dialogue about the issues. He's understood to be travelling to the UK.
Gordon Carrera. Now, let's talk about an intriguing story about a whale that people have been sharing. A white beluga whale found off Norway wearing a harness that Norwegian researchers say could have been trained by the Russian Navy. Nuala McGovern has been speaking to Alan Clough, the journalist who broke the story. He works for NRK, that's the Norwegian public broadcaster. He told her how he found out about the story.
On Thursday night, I got a phone from a friend of mine who's a fisherman, Mr. Joar Hessen, and he told me about a white whale that was circling around their fishing boats. And he was curious on what he should do. He wanted to alert the police, he wanted to alert anyone who could help this animal because it had some straps on him and they couldn't remove them. So he was a bit stressed and wanted me to help him.
So what did you do? You decided to go?
I decided to go and I brought my equipment because I thought there might be a story here. And I also learned that the fisherman had succeeded in connecting to the fishing directory in Norway, who had sent a boat to this place in order to try to free the mammal from the straps. And I called them up and asked if I could go along. And when I arrived at the place, they picked me up and we drove out to the place where the fishing boat with my friend was, and a small dinghy boat where there were two inspectors from the fishing directory trying to free this whale, but it didn't succeed. So now this was on Friday night. Then I watched over to the fishing boat and then I saw Joar put his survival suit on.
That's your friend?
Yeah. And he jumped into the water and swam up to this whale. And for some reason, the whale seemed to trust him more than actually coming along to this small boat. And within, say, 30 minutes, he had managed to release the mammal from the harness. And the harness has actually now been turned over to the police.
Because in some of the reports I was reading, Alan, it said that it was equipment from St. Petersburg. Did you see that?
Yes, I actually filmed it because when we came ashore, I asked to take a closer look and they showed me the sign. It said St. Petersburg and it was engraved in a piece of plastic connected to the harness.
In Russian?
No, in English, actually.
The plot thickens. So what do you think this whale and his harness, is it, if it's a he, where he came from?
During the time I was making the report, I was in contact with a marine biologist, and he had spoken to a colleague in Russia, and they said that they were sure that this was a whale used by Russian authorities or the Russian Navy.
The Norwegian journalist Alan Clough. So while Russia has neither confirmed nor denied the whale belongs to them, our defense and diplomatic correspondent Jonathan Marcus explains why training a whale for spying may not be such an outlandish idea after all.
We know that both the United States and the Russian navies have looked into the use of sea mammals to carry out a variety of military tasks, particularly for both of them dolphins, not least because they're very intelligent. They can be trained effectively like a dog. And they also, of course, have extraordinary capacities of a sort of natural sonar that they can detect items underwater. So, for example, typically the American Navy has trained dolphins to help find submerged sea mines. They can find and warn about swimmers, frogmen coming in perhaps to attack ships at an anchorage and so on. And indeed, American naval seaborne mammal units, if you like, have been deployed in crises in the Iraq War and so on. And we believe the Russians have a very similar capability. So it wouldn't be an extraordinary flight of fancy to imagine that the Russians have been doing this. And there have been reports actually about this in the past that have never been confirmed. Why, goodness gracious, it should actually be wearing a harness with St. Petersburg emblazoned on it in English, I'm really not sure.
Jonathan Marcus. Still to come in this edition of the Global News Podcast, we'll be hearing how a children's talent show is causing outrage over vote rigging in Russia. In the space of a couple of months, Mozambique has been badly hit by two cyclones which have flattened parts of the country. In March, it was Cyclone Idai, and then on Thursday, Cyclone Kenneth destroyed tens of thousands of homes with winds of up to 220 kilometers per hour. The number of people killed has risen from 5 to 38. Speaking from Pemba, a spokeswoman for the World Food Programme, Deborah Nguyen, said hundreds of thousands of people were at risk.
We are very concerned because the water levels keep rising, keeps raining since yesterday. A lot of people have been displaced from their homes because we have more than 3,000 houses that have been destroyed. According to the government, we have 700,000 people who are at risk after the cyclone and 200,000 people who are at very high risk. So we are gearing up our emergency operation to make sure that we can bring the food and the aid that people need.
Aid agencies say they're still struggling to reach the worst affected areas. From Mozambique, the BBC's Lebo Diseko sent this report.
It does seem that weather conditions eased off slightly in the north of the country. That allowed aid agencies a little window of opportunity to start distributing aid. So the World Food Programme started handing out some supplies in Macomia. They also sent a plane out to the island of Ibo, which had been completely cut off. However, the situation is in flux. It's fast changing. They wanted to send in a second plane. That wasn't able to be sent. That was filled with rice, food, that sort of thing for people. The message from authorities in Pemba yesterday was this is worse than we had expected and we need help. There were concerns raised about things like cholera. Rain is expected for a number of days here. Yesterday, Pemba had 2 meters of rain. The issue is going to be how quickly they can get those supplies in. Planes were cancelled, roads very, very difficult to reach. So that's going to be the critical thing. How quickly are aid agencies going to be able to get in the supplies they need to reach the affected people?
Lebo Diseko. For the first time in more than 200 years, the Japanese emperor is about to abdicate. On Tuesday, Emperor Akihito will formally give up his throne, and the following morning, May the 1st, his son, Crown Prince Naruhito, will be named the new emperor. Under Japan's constitution, Emperor Akihito is not allowed to retire, so the government had to pass a special one-off law to allow him to do so. Over the last few weeks, as the date of his abdication has approached, huge crowds have been turning out wherever the emperor has gone to express their gratitude. Our correspondent, Rupert Wingfield-Hayes, went along to one of the final public appearances to find out why Emperor Akihito is held in such high esteem by the Japanese people.
So I am standing now just outside the imperial tombs in Hachioji on the western edge of Tokyo, and there are thousands and thousands of people here this morning, many of them elderly, but a real mixture, and they are excited in anticipation because the Emperor is about to arrive. The Emperor and Empress will drive past here in a minute. This is one of the last public appearances the Emperor and Empress will make before the abdication. Here comes the motorcade now. You can hear it going past. There's the motorcycle outriders. There's the Emperor and Empress waving to the crowd. The crowd waving their flags in response. Japanese people are not very expressive when it comes to events like this, but there is excitement here. It gives you a real sense here of just how much love and respect there is for Emperor Akihito, and gratitude for the way that he has carried out this very difficult role over the last 31 years.
And this is the last chance for everyone to see them.
Pamela Onodera was born in America, but she's lived here in Japan for the last 30 years.
They do so much good for the country. You see them in the news doing this and that for the good of the people. And it really takes you here.
Kaori Sugiyama says this is the first time she's come out to see the Emperor.
I am not from the generation that experienced the war, but the emperor is the one that has kept the peace in Japan throughout his reign. So I wanted to come and see him to show my gratitude. I wanted to tell him, thank you.
All this love and gratitude is not automatic. Many Japanese did not love the emperor's aloof father, Hirohito. But since his 1989 enthronement, Emperor Akihito has quietly set about revolutionizing the Japanese monarchy. At palace events, Empress Michiko takes to the piano. The emperor sometimes accompanies her on the cello. In the aftermath of natural disasters, he and the empress can be found sitting for hours, comforting victims in evacuation centres. No Japanese emperor has ever behaved like this in public before. But it is in foreign affairs that Akihito has left his biggest mark. From Beijing to Seoul, Manila to Saipan, he has reached out to countries invaded and brutalized by Japan during the reign of his father.
Akihito's a huge figure.
Jeff Kingston is a professor of history at Temple University in Tokyo.
He made it his business to address the unfinished business of his father. And so he created a new role for the emperor, and that was as the nation's chief emissary of reconciliation.
Professor Kingston says it has put the emperor increasingly at odds with the political establishment, particularly with Prime Minister Shinzo Abe.
Clearly, Emperor Akihito and Shinzo Abe have frosty relations. They totally disagree about the wartime narrative. Akihito has, referred to the tragedies of the war and the need for pacifism. Abe is trying to rehabilitate that era and promote, a stronger military role for Japan.
For nearly a decade, Emperor Akihito has been pushing to hand the throne to his son. On Tuesday, he will finally step out of the spotlight, and Crown Prince Naruhito will become the 126th Emperor of Japan. He is thought to share his father's liberal views, but he will have to work hard to earn the love and respect that is so widely felt for his father.
Rupert Wingfield Hayes in Japan. One of Australia's most famous poets, Les Murray, has died aged 80. When you think of poetry, what comes to mind? For Les Murray, it was about wallabies in the outback and wearing shorts in the summer. Here's the man himself reading an extract from his poem, The Dream of Wearing Shorts Forever.
To go home and wear shorts forever in the enormous paddocks in that warm climate, adding a sweater when winter soaks the grass. To camp out along the river bends for good, wearing shorts with a pocket knife, a fishing line and matches. Or there where the hills are all down below the plain, to sit around in shorts at evening on the plank veranda.
The Newsroom's Farhana Dawood has more on the life of fellow Australian Les Murray.
He was a literature great. He wrote nearly 30 volumes of poetry over several decades. Much of his work explored the history and landscape of Australia. He really played with the stereotype of the Australian language. In a way, he wanted to create a living museum where the unique Australian vernacular could be preserved and renewed. But obviously I'm an Australian, and listening to those lines, it just sort of evokes for me a feeling of that rural country place when I hear those lines about the fishing line and wearing shorts forever and the hot climate and the veranda. That was what he was all about. He was very much all about promoting a living, breathing Australian type of poetry, and not just Australian type of poetry. He was actually sort of renowned at one point for being one of the greatest exponents of English language poetry. He was awarded the Order of Australia and listed as one of Australia's 100 national living treasures by the National Trust of Australia. His work was translated into several other languages. He was dubbed the Bard of Bunya. Bunya is a reference to the rural town he grew up in. He earned a number of accolades, including the T.S. Eliot Prize, which is really prestigious. That was back in 1996. And he also picked up the Queen's Gold Medal for poetry.
Farhana Dawood. A public outcry has spurred Russian state television into launching an investigation into vote rigging in the country. The furore, however, was not over an actual election, but was sparked by the result of the finale of a children's talent show, The Voice Kids. The daughter of a Russian pop singer and the granddaughter of an oil baron won a landslide victory, sparking widespread condemnation. Our correspondent in Moscow, Steve Rosenberg, says it could be emblematic of a shift in Russian society.
What can a TV talent show tell us about the mood of a nation? Well, in Russia's case, perhaps quite a lot. When 10-year-old Michaela Abramova sang in the final of The Voice Kids on Russia's Channel 1, she stormed to victory with more than half of the televote. But by doing so, she sparked a storm of protest on Russian social media, with many calling her landslide win undeserved, suspicious even, and linking it to her connections. Michaela's mum is a pop star, her dad a businessman, her grandfather an oil tycoon. Amid accusations of a fix, the TV channel has hired a cybersecurity company to investigate whether the vote was free and fair or skewed in Michaela's favour. What is interesting about the public reaction to this children's singing contest is that it reflects what opinion polls in Russia have been indicating for some time now, that there is a growing demand here for social justice. Russians are increasingly keen to question and to challenge what they perceive as unfair. The Russian authorities will be hoping that won't extend to the political system. But as one prominent political activist here wrote on social media, what happened on The Voice was a textbook case of Russian injustice, adding, could this accidentally be the start of a revolution?
Could it indeed? Steve Rosenberg there. And that's all from us for now, but there'll be an updated version of the Global News podcast later. And if you want to comment on this edition or the topics we've covered in it, you can send us an email. The address is globalpodcast@bbc.co.uk. I'm Emilio San Pedro. Until next time, goodbye.